Well, the argument we're going to be looking at this week is called the teleological argument for God's existence. And this video is part one of that lecture. There's going to be another video that you can watch. That's part two. But this argument, like the cosmological argument, is really a class of arguments. There are many different versions of the teleological argument. And because of that, I thought probably the best way to present this argument is sort of in terms of a narrative. And what I mean by that is I'm going to be walking through the teleological argument starting with the design of the cosmos. So when we use the word telos or teleological, that's just another way of talking about purpose, design, and really what teleological arguments are trying to figure out is whether or not there's good reason to think that there's design in the cosmos or anywhere in the cosmos. And if so, does that provide evidence for God's existence? And so as we're walking through this as a narrative, we're going to be starting with the design of the cosmos, and that's what we're going to be focused on this lecture. Then we're going to see if there's design that shows up in the origin of life, the development of life, the origin of our cognitive faculties and what it means to be human. And that's sort of just the narrative of really reality that we're going to be looking at as we're walking through the teleological argument. Now, I find it helpful to place this argument in the context of the last argument that we looked at. So when we were framing the cosmological argument, we traced the argument starting with the fact of the universe. We traced the argument down to the universe. If it exists, it must have a cause. And if the universe has a cause, then you can ask the question, what is the nature of the cause? Is the universe self-caused, or is there a transcendent cause? Well, if you're following the cosmological argument, you provide reasons to show that there must be a transcendent first cause. But then you get to a point in the argument where the transcendent first cause to the universe is either a personal first cause or an impersonal first cause. If one argues that there is an impersonal first cause, then that is to argue for an atheistic position. So you can put various labels on what the impersonal first cause might be. Maybe you say nothing brought the universe into existence. Maybe we live in a multiverse and we're just a daughter universe of a parent universe. There's many different ways of conceiving of an impersonal first cause. And then you can contrast that with the idea of a personal first cause, such as God, a mind who purposes and intends. Now, if you're working through a cosmological argument, you might get to a point where you say, it seems that we're at a 50-50 coin flip. So what is the nature of this first cause? Does the cosmological argument answer that? People have debated whether or not you can lean towards a personal first cause over an impersonal first cause using the cosmological argument. But what I want to suggest is that if you put the teleological argument on top of the cosmological argument, then the way that somebody might use a teleological argument is to give you a reason for why a personal first cause is to be preferred over an impersonal first cause. And so we'll walk through the teleological argument and see if you think that it's persuasive. If it does, in fact, give us reason to think that there's a personal first cause like God. And then I suppose at this point we should talk about, well, what's the difference really between the two? Well, if we're talking about personal causation, we're talking about things that have purposes, that have intention, that there's design behind it, that there's order, that there's meaning. All of these words sort of suggest what we mean when we're talking about personal causation. Now, if you want to get technical with this, you can say that this is sort of an agent causation. So if you remember back to some of our in-class lectures, agent causation is this notion that there's an agent who is the first cause of an action. So if I'm to raise my hand and you ask, why did my hand go up? If I'm an agent, you could say that I made a choice to raise my hand. And so that's agent causation. But we could also say that that's a personal cause. It's a personal choice. So that's what we mean when we're talking about personal causation, that there's a person who brings about a particular effect. And if you can contrast that with impersonal causation, what words would describe impersonal causation? Well, now we're thinking of words like random. So do some things happen randomly? without intention, without design, without order, without meaning. These are chance events. Maybe they're events that are brought about by physical laws. So in that sense, that wouldn't be a random cause. It would be a necessary cause. And so that's what we mean when we're talking about impersonal. And what we're trying to figure out with the teleological argument is what type of cause brought the universe into existence. Now, one of the most famous versions of the teleological argument was articulated by natural theologian, philosopher, scientist William Paley. And Paley has this famous Watchmaker illustration, which he outlined in his book Natural Theology. And the illustration is very simple to understand. So he says, imagine you are walking out into the woods and you stumble across a watch. Now, if you stumble across a watch, you might ask the question, what caused this watch to be here? What is responsible for bringing this particular object into existence? Could you explain the watch through impersonal wind and wave erosion? Well, Paley argues that you can't. And if you contrast the watch with, say, a stone, and you ask what brought the stone into existence, can you explain the stone by appealing to wind and wave erosion? Well, in that case, it seems like you can. And so what Paley wants to do is he wants to figure out what is the difference between a watch and a stone. What is it about the watch that when we see it, we have this natural inference to design? We naturally assume that if there's a watch, there must be a personal watchmaker. Versus when we look at a stone, we don't assume that there must be a personal stone maker, because a stone can be, you can explain the existence of a stone by simple natural causes. And so one of the things that makes it different, somebody might say, is that a watch has a lot of moving parts that appear to be organized in such a way that they're functioning for a particular purpose, and that purpose is telling time. And so if you have different parts that are arranged together for a particular purpose, then it seems to suggest that that thing is designed. And so the question then that Paley wants us to consider is, if this is designed, the watch, then why not this, the human eye, which is arguably far more complex than a watch? So an eye has a number of different moving parts that are all working together for one specific function, and that is to see. So this is sort of an intuitive design argument, but we can articulate Paley's argument this way. So it seems that Paley is saying that human artifacts are the products of intelligent design. 2, the universe resembles these human artifacts. And so this is true if we're talking about the universe as a whole, or even if we are talking about many different features of the universe, particular features within the universe, they resemble human artifacts. Conclusion: therefore, the universe is probably a product of intelligent design. But, he goes on, the universe is vastly more complex and gigantic than a human artifact. Therefore, there probably is a powerful and vastly intelligent designer who designed the universe. So this is a very straightforward articulation of Paley's argument. And so it would help us to kind of dig into different aspects of the universe to see whether or not the specifics are compelling here. So just to begin, so what Paley is saying is that when you look at human artifacts, so whether we're talking about watches, or whether you're talking about Mount Rushmore, or any human artifact, anything that was brought about by human design, it is reasonable to infer that these things are in fact designed. And if human artifacts are designed, can we apply the same method for inferring design to natural things? That is, things that we don't think were created by humans, but nevertheless still have the same features. To think through this, we want to first figure out what is it that makes us intuit design when we come to human artifacts. Here's one way that design advocates have thought about the inference of design. And specifically, I'm going to be referring to the design advocate William Dembski, who wrote a book several years ago, I think in the 90s, a book called The Design Inference, where he actually developed a method for how one detects design. Now, I'm not going to go through that method in detail here, but one of the things I want to point out about the method is that Dembski lays out that there are three particular modes of causation that could go about explaining any particular effect. So you could have chance causation. So I won't go through the Dembski's specific mathematical definition of chance here. For our purposes, we might just say that chance is a cause where it could have brought about two or more effects. That is, whenever cause A happens, it could be the case that either effect A happens or effect B happens. And if you only have two possible effects, then what you have is a 50-50 chance. So if there is such a thing as chance causation, then that means it's a cause that brings about an effect, but it's not intended. So chance in this way is different than choice. It's different than design. It can bring about many different particular effects. Then you have necessity as a mode of causation, and that is when cause A happens, then necessarily effect A happens. So when you think about these types of things, I like to use the illustration of flipping a coin. So oftentimes when you flip a coin and you catch it and you put it on the back of your hand, if you ask what are the chances that the result is going to be heads, many people right away will say that there's a 50-50 chance. So in that sense, they're thinking that their chance maybe is a mode of causation that actually operates in the world. But of course, if you think about it deeply, if you know the exact force that you put on the coin when you flip it in the air, and if you know exactly the height at which you're going to catch the coin, and you could calculate all the variables, you might say that it's not a chance event that happens, but it's actually an event of necessity, that given the specific forces and specific just the physics of the coin flipping in the air, if you calculate everything, then it's actually necessarily going to be one or the other. And so some philosophers have actually argued that there is no such thing as a chance event. Chance is simply the word that we use when we can't calculate, when we're ignorant of all the factors that go into explaining a particular effect. So all I want you to know now is that at least at the beginning of this discussion, it could be the case that there are chance causes that bring about certain effects. It could be that there's necessary causes that bring about particular effects. But then the question is whether or not there's design causation or personal causation or agent causation. And this is one of the things that Dembski wants us to think about. And it's interesting that when it comes to explaining objects like watches or Mount Rushmore, that we aren't tempted to say that chance is the best explanation for why there's a watch or why there's Mount Rushmore. We also don't want to say that necessity is the best explanation for these things, or even the combination of the two working together. So maybe it's a little bit of chance, maybe it's a little bit of necessity working together. Most people intuitively say that design is the best explanation. Well, if that's the case, whatever that method is that we're using to intuit design there, does that work when we're talking about the cosmos as a whole? So the first step of the teleological argument that we're going to be looking at is trying to explain the design of the cosmos. Is there good reason to think that the universe is in fact design, or are the particular parameters of the cosmos set up in such a way that they can be best explained by chance and necessity, or the two working together? Now, to understand the parameters that I'm talking about, we're going to watch this video that was put out by William Lane Craig and his organization on the fine-tuning of the cosmos. So he's going to be presenting a fine-tuning argument for God's existence. It's a teleological argument, and we'll watch this video. It's an animated video to help you understand the parameters it is that we're trying to think about specifically when we're talking about the design argument. So let's watch.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life-prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence suggests that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, Small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
So this video provides a pretty compelling illustration of what the fine-tuning argument is. And again, this is one version of a teleological argument. And really the question that it provokes is that when we look at these fine-tuning parameters within the universe, and these parameters are finely tuned so that carbon-based life form would exist like us. If they're fine-tuned in such a way, what is the best explanation for that fine-tuning? Is it chance? Is it necessity? And usually in teleological arguments, what you want to do is you want to provide reasons for thinking that chance is not a good explanation, as you saw in this video. Neither is necessity. And if you can rule out those options, then design is the best explanation out of the alternatives. And if design is the best explanation, then that infers that there must be a designer, a conscious designer, such as God. So these are how these arguments function. Now, one of the things I should say about the fine-tuning argument then is that this argument is only about the possibility of life. Now, what mostly was presented in this video was what's called cosmic fine-tuning. Sometimes there's a distinction between cosmic fine-tuning and local fine-tuning. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the local fine-tuning in this lecture, but that distinction is when we're talking about cosmic fine-tuning, we're talking about what is the possibility of life existing anywhere in the cosmos? What has to be true about our universe as a whole for carbon-based life to exist? And it turns out, if according to what we know right now from contemporary cosmology, that the chances are very low that we would live in a universe that makes life possible. Now, after you have all those parameters in place, that doesn't mean that life will actually occur. So you could have a universe where the fine-tuning parameters are just right so that life is possible, but that doesn't mean that therefore life will actually exist. And when we get to the next lecture, we're going to be talking about, okay, what actually needs to be the case after you have a finely tuned universe for life to originate. And this is when you get to some local fine-tuning questions. So what part of the galaxy, what has to be right in a particular part of the universe for one planet to have life. And you need something probably like a star. It has to be a certain distance from the Earth. You need to have something like a moon that's also a certain distance from the Earth. And whenever you start talking about those questions, you're talking about what's called local fine-tuning. So that's finding a spot within the universe where all the ingredients are just right for life to originate. And so we'll be talking about some of that in our next lecture. But specifically, we're going to be talking about what are the chances that, given all the parameters are right, Now, what are the chances that life would actually originate? That's when you're talking about the origin of life. That's the next lecture that we're going to be looking at. But this fine-tuning argument that was presented in this video is about the chances of life possibly existing, or what are the chances of us having a universe where life is even possible. And if we want to state that argument in a syllogism, it would go something like this. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity and or chance, or design. 2, it is not due to physical necessity and or chance, and if you can demonstrate that, then the conclusion is, therefore, it is due to design. Now, of course, the questionable premise in this argument is premise 2, so it's worth considering one objection to this premise. And this objection is sometimes called the anthropic alternative. And one of the ways of thinking about this objection is thinking about the chances of winning the lottery. So what are the chances of winning the lottery in the state of South Dakota? Well, last time I looked up the odds, it's about 1 in 175 million, which means it's really not worth your time or money to play the lottery. If you're going to buy a lottery ticket, you might as well just take that money and invest it, and that has a better chance of having some sort of return than the 1 in 175 million chance. So it's not worth your time to play the lottery. Most people know that. But if you ask the question, what are the chances of winning the lottery? And here I'm asking the question in general. I'm not asking what are the chances of you specifically winning the lottery. I'm asking what are the chances of winning the lottery, period, for anyone to win the lottery. And it turns out that the odds of someone winning the lottery is actually pretty good. The chance of one particular person winning the lottery is small, but if you consider how many people actually play the lottery, then eventually somebody's going to win the lottery. And when you think about the question this way, what you're doing is you're increasing what might be called your probabilistic resources. So as you consider more people playing the lottery, you're increasing the odds, the probability of someone winning the lottery. And if we take that and we use that and apply that to the cosmos as a whole, we might ask, well, what are the chances of us living in a cosmos that's finely tuned? Well, it is very improbable considering the parameters that we know about. But if we do live in a multiverse, then it seems to be the case that maybe you increase your probabilistic resources, and maybe we're just one universe out of an ensemble of universes that happens to be the lucky winners. And if we consider the local fine-tuning, what are the chances that our planet would be the planet that would win the cosmic lottery? Well, it's pretty small, but if you consider how big our universe is, then it seems like the chances become a lot more reasonable. To quote Richard Dawkins on this anthropic alternative, he writes, "The anthropic alternative to the design hypothesis is statistical. Scientists invoke the magic of large numbers. It has been estimated that there are between 1 billion to 30 billion planets in our galaxy and about 100 billion galaxies in the universe. Knocking a few knots off for reasons of ordinary prudence, a billion is a conservative estimate of the number of available planets in the universe. Now, suppose the origin of life, the spontaneous arising of something equivalent to DNA, really was a quite staggeringly improbable event. Suppose it was so improbable as to occur on only 1 in a billion planets. A grant-giving body would laugh at any chemist who admitted that the chance of his proposed research succeeding was only 1 in 100. But here we are talking about the odds of 1 in a billion. Now I should just note here, Dawkins is referring specifically to local fine-tuning, not cosmic fine-tuning, but you get the idea that he's setting up here, the statistical argument that he's setting up. So even if we suppose that the odds of life originating in one planet is 1 in a billion, that's a small chance, And yet, Dawkins says, even with such absurdly long odds, life will still have arisen on a billion planets, of which Earth, of course, is one. And the reason that we know Earth is one, of course, is because here we are talking about it. So in other words, what Dawkins is saying is when you increase the probabilistic resources, that is, when you consider the cosmic context of how many planets are playing the cosmic lottery, it isn't unreasonable to think that any one particular planet would win the cosmic lottery. Just like it would be the case that if you actually won the lottery, it would feel almost like magic. What are the chances? It was 1 in 175 million chances that you would win the lottery, and yet someone's going to win. And that principle, that anthropic alternative, is what Dawkins suggests is a better alternative to the design hypothesis. It's a statistical alternative. And so what you need to consider when you're thinking about the teleological argument is it more reasonable to infer that design is the best explanation, or is it more reasonable to infer this anthropic alternative? And at this point in the argument, we just have considered the chances of cosmic fine-tuning. When we get to our next lecture, we will see how those odds might continue to stack on top of each other as we consider the chances of life originating, as we consider the chances of life developing through biological evolution, and as we consider the chances of us arising, Homo sapiens with cognitive faculties that think about these types of questions. And so that's where we're going to be turning to in our next lecture.